Advanced stuff, gotchas. These are the things that trip you up. Now, look, I'm going to be real clear with you. Every single one of these we have covered in a previous nugget, but I thought this would be a good place as we kind of get near the end of our discussion together to go over the things that trip up people the most. Two reasons for that. One, it's a good refresher. It's a good way to help you make sure that, okay, at least these big ones I've got in my head. But you're also coming to the point where you're going to be ready to start teaching other people stuff about PowerShell and helping them figure out the gotchas. And so I thought by kind of lining all of these up, it'd be a good starter for conversation. If you want to do a little lunch and learn where you work, or work through an issue with a colleague or a peer or something like that, this is kind of a good place to start. These are the things that trip up everybody in PowerShell and how you can avoid them. Here's what we'll cover. Formatting gotchas, particularly the business of formatting commandlets not outputting anything that you can use in most places. Confusion between operators like contains and like. What PowerShell does when you try to work with a property that isn't there. How PowerShell uses the filter parameter so diversely. That can be confusing. Understanding that sometimes command output isn't what PowerShell considers output. When you're working with HTML pages, doing one page at a time is crucial. Dealing with string concatenation. And understanding that a collection of objects is not the same as an object. So I'll show you examples of how all of these gotchas really, I think, trip people up the most and show you how you do what you probably meant to do when you ran across the gotcha. Now, I'm going to be on Windows 8 using PowerShell 3. However, with the exception of one thing that I will point out when we get there, everything here applies to PowerShell version 2 and later. So this is an all versions on deck nugget. Let's start with formatting. Now, this is something I made a big deal of when we got to the formatting nugget way back, but let's bring it up again. Here's what folks will do. Here's the gotcha. Let's see, I'm going to run get process, and I'm going to sort things by VM, and I'm going to format table because I want to auto size, and I'm going to only pick the properties name, VM, PM, and let's see, ID. Yeah, that looks great. That's exactly what I want. Okay, so let's go ahead and export that to a CSV file with my processes. And the problem now, if you look at that file, is that it does not contain what you thought it contained. It contains formatting data, format start data, format auto size info. Look at all this garbage in here. The problem is format commands produce a special type of formatting instruction that is really only designed to be consumed by outhost, which is the default commandlet that gets everything to the screen, like you see here, out file, out printer, and out string. So anytime you see a format command, if there is a command after it, it needs to be one of those guys and nothing else, because nothing else is able to consume the output of format commands. And so that's why the little rule, and I gave you this earlier, was format right, meaning when you've got a command, your formatting should be as far to the right, as far to the end of that command as possible in order to avoid any kind of problems. If you were to take this out to a file, it's going to look just like it did on the screen, because that's what the formatting commands do. They make things pretty, they make them attractive, but once they become attractive, you can't do much with them. I've seen folks do this one. Yeah, that's not going to work. And this is actually a good error message. The object of the type Microsoft.PowerShell.commands.internal, meaning you shouldn't be messing with it, .format entry data, is not valid or not in the correct sequence. This is probably caused by a user-specified format command. Yeah, the roundabout way of saying, don't do that. It's not going to work. So that's one important gotcha. Let's move on to another one. And this is one folks will run across a lot too. What's a good way? Okay, here we go. Get service. where $_status contains run. Because I don't know if status is running or run or runs or whatever, so I'm just using some wildcards there. And the problem is, you're telling me I have no services that are running? That does not seem likely. Here's the problem. That's not what the contains operator does. Folks will do this also. That's right, without the wildcards. Well, okay. That kind of seems to have done what I think it maybe did, but is not exactly it. And here's the thing. Contains is designed to tell you if a collection contains a particular object. Here's the simple way. Collection. Does collection contains 2? Yes, it does. Does it contain A? No, it doesn't. So the problem is it's not really designed to work against simple string wildcard matching. That's why this didn't work. It was actually looking at the asterisks as literal characters, and it was trying to see if this property, which contains a string value, had this. What you mean to use here is the like operator. The like operator is what does wildcard matching string comparisons. Contains is designed to do something a little bit different. And if you need a refresher, help about operators will break it down for you. You get to the section on comparison operators, also help about comparison operators. Breaks it down for you. And you'll see contains, not contains, and they have companions, in and not in. So it's worth reading up on those if you need a quick reminder about, what's going on if you get confused about that particular gotcha. This next one will trip you up in 2 discrete ways. So here's the first one. Let's do something simple. Get process, select object, properties, name, ID, VM, PM, and WS. What the heck? What's going on there? Why is that empty? Let's take this one out so we can get a table. Why do we have a whole empty column here? It's because I typoed the property name ID. I asked for the column DI. PowerShell said, there's no property here called DI, but I mean, whatever. I'll just make a blank column for you if that's what you want, you crazy kids. It lets you get away with that, unfortunately. So you got to be a little careful. Anytime something comes up, make sure you just go back and see if you maybe just typoed something. Whoops. Oh, I typed VM twice. That'll do it too. There we go. But the other place this same type of thing will mess with you. See if you can predict what's going to happen here. Get process. Let's select object, property, name, ID, VM, PM, WS, and then sort them on CPU. Works. Not going to complain. No errors, but they weren't sorted on CPU. And I always tell people, if something's not behaving the way you think in PowerShell, back off the last command and see what you're working with. The output of select object only includes the properties you told it to include. CPU is not one of them. PowerShell won't complain when you try to sort on a non-existent property. It will just waste time not doing it. So you need to pay really close attention to what you have in the pipeline at the whole time. These objects, the objects produced by that command, do have a CPU property. I just took them away because I did not include it at this point. You got to pay real close attention. Make sure you're thinking about what's in the pipeline at every single stage of delivery so that you're not trying to get it to do something that it just doesn't make sense. The next gotcha really isn't PowerShell's fault. It's that PowerShell has to deal with a lot of external technologies, and those technologies just, they work the way they work. Here's where this will usually crop up first. Let's grab Win32 logical disk, and we'll put a filter so that we just get the ones where the drive type equals 3. Wacka, wacka, wacka. Invalid query. So anytime you see a minus filter parameter, PowerShell is probably not looking at the actual filter. The filter is probably being passed to the underlying tech. In that case, it's Windows management instrumentation. And that means you have to construct the filter in a way that makes that underlying technology happy, which in this case means using more traditional comparison operators instead of the PowerShell -EQ operator, right? Now, the only way you're going to learn any of that is to read the help and ideally look at the examples for the command to see what sort of stuff it wants. Now, that is not a universal truth. There are some PowerShell commands, I'm thinking the Active Directory ones in particular, that do accept PowerShell style filter criteria, and the command translates that to whatever filter criteria the underlying technology needs. But it's going to be different with every single command you run. So you're just going to have to take the time to research it, figure out what criteria that particular command uses, and roll with it. Next, gotcha. Not everything that you would consider output is considered to be output by PowerShell. Simple example, let's do this. No, not out file. Let's just do format table. And I get nothing on the screen. And that's because the only thing that gets carried through the pipeline from command to command to command is stuff that's put into the pipeline. That's what PowerShell considers output. When you run a command, if you get nothing on the screen, then from PowerShell's perspective, there was no output. Yes, the command export CSV did produce a file on disk. You might consider that to be output. It's something that didn't exist before. It came from the command, so it was put out by the command. It's output. But PowerShell doesn't consider that output because it isn't in the pipeline. So you can only pipe from one command to another if the command is actually producing output in the first place. Now, some commands have a pass-through parameter that makes them pass through whatever it is they got as input to begin with. But you'll see this command, as an example, does not have a minus pass-through. I'll show you one that does. This has a minus pass-through. So normally this would not produce any output, right? Get service, name, bits, stop service. No output. So if I was trying to do something like this, that's going to be an empty file because stop service didn't produce any output. In that case, it did produce output, and so something would have gone into that file. Boom, right there. So pass-through, if the command has pass-through will make it take whatever it took as input and put it in the pipeline so that it can go on to another command. And this next one is definitely a massive gotcha. Folks will do this. Let's see, get service, convert to HTML. Maybe throw some pre-content in there. Yeah, no pre-content. We'll put in a little H2 heading and have it say services. Yeah, something like that. And then out that to a file, obviously. Then come back and run another command to get another piece of information. So the idea is we're trying to produce a multi-section report. So we've put little section headers, and what I'm going to do different on this last one is append it. So if we look at that in IE, what did we call that? Report.html. If we look at that in IE, it's going to look basically okay, I think. If IE doesn't want to play along. Reports.html. So we get our top section there, and we scroll down enough, and there's the second section. So this isn't necessarily awful appearing. I realize the formatting is not very pretty. Formatting's terrible. Let's look at the source on that, though. And the reason this is not a good HTML page, this is not valid HTML, this is wrong HTML. You can see at the top, we get a doc type declaration, and the HTML page begins here. Halfway down, We close out that HTML document, and then we've just jammed another entire HTML document into the same thing. Now, IE will let you get away with that. Not every web browser will. It is not valid HTML. If you pasted this whole thing into an online HTML validator, it would explode into a million pieces and complain bitterly about you. Because an HTML page is only supposed to be one HTML page. You can actually do really close to that. It's just instead of, well, the easiest way to do this is to capture this into a variable, not a file. So we'll call this F1. And instead of outing it to a file, we're going to out it to a string. But rather than letting it produce an entire HTML page, we're going to have it produce a fragment. And then F2 is going to be the same thing. We'll put services second this time. And we'll save that into a separate variable. So now I've got two fairly simple, well, lengthy, simple variables, F1 and F2. Now, look what I'll do. Convert to HTML. The body is F1 and F2. And out that to a file called report.html. Yeah? So let's see what that did differently. See report.html. There's procs, and then halfway down, there's services. So our lack of beauty is still here. This is not beautiful, but if you look at the source of this, it's a single HTML page. So this might not be beautiful, but it is valid HTML, and that's important. Now, if you want to make it beautiful, you go back and you watch the nugget where I showed you how to make beautiful HTML reports using PowerShell. But the point is to produce each section of your report as a fragment and then combine them together. Now, another thing I'll see people do, and this is the string concatenation bit that I alluded to in the introduction, is something like this. They'll put, let's make up a variable. X, let's say that's a server name, server2, and then we'll make Y a number. And they'll go to display a message, and they'll do something like write output the server plus $x plus was pinged plus $. I'm so not used to doing this concatenation. It's hard for me to type. And you see, it's because write output is taking the space character as a delimiter between all these pluses. And so it's not doing the math. It's not doing the concatenation. It's just trying to display each one as an item in a collection. If you do that, yeah, kind of, sort of, but the pluses don't, yeah. Look, don't do that. Don't concatenate strings. Just use double quotation marks. Get rid of the plus sign. Get rid of all these. That's all you need. The double quotation marks will replace the variables with their contents. Now, if you need to access something more than just the variable, you can use a sub-expression, right? That's $ with parentheses. Anything in here gets executed as code. So I could punch in length and get the server, the length of what's in X. Point is, double quotes, sub-expressions, string concatenation will get you away from most of the gotchas. If you find yourself using a plus sign to concatenate strings, you're probably setting yourself up for at least 50% failure. Right? Some situations that'll work just great, some it won't. Some folks, where's one? Some folks will get around it by doing this, making the entire thing a parenthetical, and that makes write output see that whole thing as one thing, and then it works. But man, is that easier to read, or is that easier to read? Because you get the same results, and I think this one is a heck of a lot easier to just run through your brain, right? And the last one I want to run through, this one's a little tricky. Here's why. The behavior in PowerShell 2 was different, and I actually like its behavior better. Services equals get service. Now, folks will start to do something like this. They'll run through these things. If service.running equals, or no, service.status. Won't work anyway. Service.status equals running, then write, then they'll do something. We'll put a little write host in here. Oh, you mean none of my services are running? I didn't put services. Hang on. We're going to type it right. There we go. Oh, so all of my services are running. Yes, here's the thing. This isn't one service. That's like saying cars equals get car, and then if cars red, or if cars color equals red, then do something. Well, which car? They're not all the same color, and that's the thing. You've got to remember, anytime you put more than one of something into a variable, it becomes a collection. Collections aren't the same thing as the individual objects that they contain. Now, here's where PowerShell 3 actually makes it a little difficult to get that concept. If services contains multiple services, then I can't ask for the name of the collection. If you've got a room full of people, I can't walk in and say, hey, what's your name? And expect a single answer. It's a collection of people. In PowerShell 2, this would actually not give you a result. I believe it gave you an error. In 3 and later, they implicitly, meaning behind the scenes and without your knowledge, they implicitly enumerate. PowerShell goes, oh, this is a collection. He probably meant I want the name of each service. Meaning you walked into the room full of people and said, everybody give me your name one at a time. I don't like relying on that behavior because, for one, it's not the same on older versions of PowerShell. What you should be doing is anytime you have a variable, let's pull up the IC. Anytime you have a variable that contains a collection and you need to do something, services equals get service, for example, you should be enumerating that. For each service in services, I'm going to work with them one at a time. Oops. I'm going to work with them one at a time. So just bear that in mind. A collection is not the same thing as the individual objects that it contains. All right, let's make sure we got all these things. We did formatting, we did contains and like, missing properties. Oh, we did cover the filtering diversity. This is just one that you have to get used to, and you have to be willing to read the help a lot. Understanding that output is not always what PowerShell considers output. HTML pages, one fragment at a time, not one page at a time. String concatenation, you can avoid so many issues just doing double quotes. And then collections versus objects, and a couple of the goofy things that version 3 came up with to make that even more confusing. So there you go. Those are the PowerShell gotchas. Those are how to avoid them. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.